Hi guys, it's Kristen with Hooks, Books, and Wanderlust, and today I wanted to show you a quick tutorial on how to make a very basic crochet pumpkin. I've got one here that I made, and I tend to make them in kind of two sizes. This is a little bit taller version of the one that I make. And today I'm going to show you how to do the fatter version. It's actually the same process, it's just a couple more rows to do the other option. So let's get started. First of all, you are going to need a crochet hook. I've got a size 6.5 millimeter here, or if you're in the US, that's a size K. And I've got some super bulky Woolies Thick and Quick here, which is a CYC 6. So I am going to go ahead and get started with that. You're also going to need scissors, a tapestry needle, large eye for your bulky, something to use for your stump. I've got this little piece of wood here that's been sawed off that I like to use for kind of a rustic look. You can do that, or you can also use a cinnamon stick, or you can even just crochet something or whatever you really want to stick in there for your stump. And then you're also going to need some stuffing, and I've got some fiberfill here. Sometimes I use my yarn ends and I shove those down in there too. You'll never know what you find inside of one of these pumpkins. And I've got some contrasting ribbon here, as well as a hot glue gun. The hot glue gun really is optional. I do it just as a trick at the end to kind of help secure my stump inside the pumpkin so that it doesn't want to pop out as easily. I would also say that, when you're handling them, not to grab them by the stump in case you tug too hard, or if you're like my kids, your kids get a hold of them or something like that, then that could be bad. So I'm sorting out my yarn vomit here that I found the center pole. So let's get started. I'm going to put this stuff aside, except for my hook. I'm going to grab that. And the first thing I'm going to do is just start out with a slip knot. And I don't know if you've seen my other videos, but there's a trick I learned from my friend Jill over at Gumleaf Crochet. And she showed this to me, and I swear I have never gone back. So when you make your slip knot, and I know I do mine a little weirdly. A lot of people like wrap it around their fingers. I could never figure that out. So I just do it the regular way, that this other alternative way rather. So I just cross my working yarn tail over my yarn end. And then I'm going to fold that loop down on top of my yarn end. And I'm going to pull up a loop from the yarn end instead of the working yarn. That's the trick. So when you do that, you'll still slip knot. You'll still use your working yarn, obviously. You're not going to try and crochet with this tiny little tail. But what that's going to do is it'll help you kind of tighten up your stitches and that knot. It's going to hide that a little more easily, but I'll show you that here shortly. So the first thing we're going to do is foundation half double crochets. I make for both of my pumpkin options, both the tall and the kind of fat version, I do the same number of stitches. It's just stuffed a little bit differently. So we'll go ahead and show you how to do this. So if you have never worked a foundation half double crochet, you just start out with your slip knot on your hook. You got your working hook, or your working loop here. And you're going to want to yarn over and chain one, and then chain another one. Then you're going to yarn over just like any other half double crochet, and you're going to work in that first chain you made, or the second chain from your hook. And I always work into that back bump so that I leave my bottom of my my chain stitches, I have that pretty V on the bottom. So I always work into the back bump, and I'm just going to pull up a loop. So at this point, if I were making a regular half double crochet, I would just yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. But we are doing a foundation half double crochet. So I am going to chain first. I've got to make a chain stitch to act as the bottom of my half double crochet. So I'm going to yarn over, pull through the first loop to chain 1, and from here now I can go ahead and work my my half double crochet as normal. So yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. So let's show you again here. So we're going to yarn over. Now for the second foundation stitch and every subsequent one, you're going to be working into that chain stitch that you made from the previous stitch. So I am going to kind of get underneath, trying to get underneath here, both of these, the V on the bottom here of our chain, and I'm going to pull up that loop, chain 1, and then half double crochet. So let's show you again here. I'm going to work into that chain stitch, pull up a loop, chain 1, yarn over, pull through 3. So now I'm going to show you the trick with this little yarn tail. Again, I got this from Jill over at Gumleaf Crochet. I cannot take credit for this, but it is so cool. I have to share it with you guys. So just kind of like your magic circles, if you've ever done those, it kind of cinches in and it hides everything really nicely. Just going to pull on that and look how closely that takes the knot into the bottom of my work. It's like completely disguised. So I'm going to go ahead and continue making foundation half double crochets for a total of 16. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little quicker here. Pulling at my yarn, sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. So insert the hook into the chain, chain 1, half double crochet. Let's see how many have I got, because I've not been counting here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to make 11. 12. 13, 14, 15, and our last one here, and something I'm going to mention too, when you're working a foundation stitch, whether it's foundation half double, foundation double, or foundation single crochet, when you make that chain 1, you want to try and make sure that it's the height of the working loop on your hook, because if it's too short, it's going to be like this. It's going to pull your work and kind of bow it in. So you definitely don't want that to be too tight. So that will be 16. Now I'm doing 16 because that's just my preference. If you would like to make your pumpkins taller, then you can add stitches here. Just continue making them until you're satisfied. Generally speaking, you can kind of, the finished height kind of depends on what, how tightly you pull everything in, cinching it at the end. So a general rule of thumb though is, I think like in the course of like half of this height or half of this length that I've got here with my 16 is generally, about the size that I'm going to have my pumpkin when it's finished. So yeah, so if you want to make it longer or if you want to make it shorter, increase or decrease the number of starting foundation half double crochets. So next we are going to chain 1 and start row 2. So when you're working a half double, you'll see here before I turn it that we've got these pretty V's on the top. That's the top of our stitches. We're very familiar with those, and it's what we normally work under when we're working our row stitches. We would normally just go ahead and chain 1 and then start working here under those 2 loops that make the V. But for this tutorial, we are making a ridged pumpkin, and you do that by working into this 3rd loop that is created when you make a half double crochet. So I'm going to half double crochet in the 3rd loop. I'm just going to, well, maybe I'm going to, let's see, get it under there. Okay, I'm just going to put my hook underneath that 3rd loop, or that yarn over that we did, and pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. That's a half double crochet in the 3rd loop. So again, normally I'm yarning over, and normally I would work my stitch under those 2, the V, but now I'm going to work it under that 3rd loop. And just make your half double crochet otherwise just as normal. And what you're going to notice as you do this, I'll get a few of them in here just to have something to show you. That when you turn your work, working into that 3rd loop pushes those top V's to the outside of your work. It kind of creates this beautiful ridge. And when you do this in subsequent rows, meaning every single row we work is always going to be worked into that 3rd loop, it's going to create this really beautiful textured ribbing effect, which is going to be like the ridges of our pumpkin. So you're just going to continue working half double crochets into the 3rd loop on every stitch across your row. So you're not increasing and you're not decreasing. You should have the exact same number of stitches in every row that you started with at the beginning. In my case here, that would be 16. So I'm just finishing up the row. Can't get my hook under there. There we are. All right. So then when you're done with that, you can just chain 1 and turn. If you need to tighten that hook, that little starting thing back up a little bit better, should be good. Let's just double check that we've got the right number. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So that is correct. We've got our chain 1 and turn. And here's our 3rd loop for the next row that we're going to work into that all the way. We're just going to keep doing that row by row, row after row, until we are as many rows in as we want. I am going to work this as 20 rows. That's going to give me a little bit wider diameter to my pumpkin. If you want it skinnier, you can work less. If you want it fatter, you can work more. I generally try and work an even number, and there's a reason for that I will show you when I've finished making all of these rows. So I am going to go ahead and take a break here while I'm just going to end the video here for a minute and then finish working my 20 rows, and I will see you back here when that's done. All right, so we are just finishing our 20th row here of half double crochet worked in that 3rd loop. And the reason I suggested doing an even number is so that when you work your seam, that it ends up being pretty well hidden within the pumpkin. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 rows. And what I'm going to do is slip stitch my short edges together. But I want to make sure that I fold it in the correct way. so that we can hide that seam as much as we can. So if you'll notice on the good side here, I'm going to call this my front because I've got the same amount of distance between the edge and this little ribbing here, and roughly the same between this edge and this ribbing. So I want to make sure that when I seam them, I'm putting my right sides together, folding it right sides together. And that way I should have this tail here on the side facing me. I've already done my chain 1 here. I need to flip my yarn around. Here we go. So I'm ready to go ahead and slip stitch these 2 short ends together. What I am going to do is work under the V. This is another reason why when we do that foundation double crochet, we try and work into that chain gives us a nice finished edge so that we have 2 matching V's. So I'm just going to slip stitch them together. And just continue doing that for every pair of stitches all the way across. And we should have a total of 16 slip stitches. So, and a slip stitch is just inserting your hook into the stitch, pulling up a loop, and then pulling that loop through the working loop. I'll split my yarn there a little bit. Just keep working those slip stitches across the row. And as we approach the end of our row or edge or whatever you want to call it, and we're about ready to work our last slip stitch, you want to make sure before you cut your yarn that you leave a nice long tail that we can use to cinch both around the top and the bottom, which means it's going to have to go through the pumpkin at some point. So the way we measure out that is I just kind of, pull my yarn roughly around the same distance and then around the bottom, accounting for that much. So that leaves us with maybe a good 15 to 24 inches of yarn, and then just go ahead and snip it there. Go ahead and pull that through. Okay. And what I want to show you is now you can see this very big, thick seam here. That's going to go on the inside. So when you pull that right side out, pretty well hidden. I mean, it's right there, and if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, but honestly, it's pretty well hidden. And that's why we do an even number, is so that we're able to hide that seam as much as possible. If you end up doing an odd number of rows, then you get something like this, because that's how I did this first one. So here's my ridge, and here's my other ridge, and there's my seam. But it's kind of far apart, so it's more obvious of the seam there. I don't know. You can do what you want to do. I just prefer to do the even number. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip this back out, wrong side out, just for a second, so I can weave in my tails, or well, the one tail. So grab my tapestry needle here. And I'm going to go ahead and weave that. My ends are kind of like apart here, so I'm just going to connect them. And then I just like to kind of go back and forth in this seam that we did in the last step here. Doesn't have to be perfect, just to kind of secure it and make sure it's in there. And then once that is done, go ahead and snip that tail. Or really, since it's on the inside, you don't really have to, I don't suppose. So snip it or don't, whatever you feel like doing, that's cool. So we'll flip it right side back out. And I want to pull my long yarn tail here back out from my tube. And I'm going to go ahead and thread that on my yarn needle again. And basically, I'm just going to work underneath each of my ridges. So I'm pulling my yarn just in front of this ridge stitch here. And I'm going to make sure I go under the V of each of my ridges all the way around. And doing that, at the end, we will cinch it together, and that will be our bottom. If I can get it in there, there we go. There's something very therapeutic. I don't know what it is, but I find it very therapeutic weaving and cinching like this. I mean, honestly, I could do this step for hours, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird. Okay, so here is our last ridge. So we've come full circle, and now I am just going to kind of pull on it and cinch it closed. I like to try and meld it and kind of fold it in on itself so that when I cinch it, it kind of cinches those edges in on each other. I just think that it looks a little neater that way. You can certainly go ahead and pull it and then kind of use your fingers to push everything in like that and then cinch again. And you want to make sure it's good and tight because you don't want a hole down there. So there we have that. And then usually what I do is I will go around just another time just to make sure that it is really secure, but you'll want to make sure that you're not going into the wrong spots when you do this. So you want to make sure you're still going under the same ridge stitches and not like other body stitches. Again, it just helps it look a little bit more polished when you look at the bottom of it. There we go. You can see how that's kind of really just pulling it together a lot nicer. And I think we'll do these last two stitches here and then call it done on the bottom here. All right, so now for the next step, you are going to take your needle and work your right into the center of that pumpkin butt. Yep, I called it a pumpkin butt. That's what it is. All right, so now I've come up through the center, and I'm just gonna kind of set that aside for right now, and I'm gonna grab my stuffing. Again, this is fiberfill. You can find it at any craft store, loose or whatever, in various different bags. I actually, for this one, had a pillow that was not very comfortable to sleep on, and so I decided to just tear it up. So that's what my stuffing is. So, you know, you do stuff with whatever you want, even a yarn tail. We'll just throw that in there. Why not? Just for fun. When I do this step, I do want to try and keep the yarn kind of in the center of all the stuffing. So if I do, I'll do one side and then I'll kind of use my hand to separate as I stuff back in. And definitely err on the side of too much stuffing as opposed to too little, because it's gonna help make a nice firm pumpkin. So I just keep going until I keep pulling it and pushing, molding it, sculpting it the way I want. I'm gonna add a little bit more fiberfill here. I really do feel like I'm on a potter's wheel or something, like spinning. So that's good for a good start. I might top it off a little more as we close everything up, but you can kind of start to see everything is taking shape. And I'm just gonna go ahead and push that down. Actually, I think I am gonna go ahead and add a little bit more here. Just kind of shove it in there. A little overflowing. That's okay. It'll go in just fine when we're ready to cinch up, which is what our next step is. So here again, I'm going to start on the seam. So you can tell that's the seam, or you can look on the inside. And that I'm going to make sure I get under these two pieces of yarn here right in front of that ridge. Whoops. Okay. So I am going to pull that, and I'm just going to go underneath those ridges just the same way I did on the bottom. Do it again on the top. Now, I just poked myself. Don't do that. That's not part of this process. Okay. Get that stuffing back in there here. I'm sorry I keep hitting the camera. I'm really bad about that. Okay, so I am coming around to the last one here. And you can see I'm kind of curving in on myself now. And let's check the shape of it here. I think maybe it could use just a little more. We'll stuff just a smidge more in there. Let's see here. That works. Okay, that should be good. So what I'm going to do for this next step, and this is for the large pumpkin that I do this, I like to have mine, like I smush them down and then I want to pull it shorter. So this is the strand as it was coming up through the body. This is what we stuffed our stuffing around. Remember how I told you you wanted to make sure that stayed coming up through the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm pushing the stuffing down and kind of holding that with my thumb and my index finger of my non-dominant hand. And I'm going to just pull all of this in to that height. So now that I've got that kind of cinched in more, I can really get a feel for just exactly what kind of shape I've got right now with it and move it around till I get that great shape that I want. So that looks pretty good to me. All right, from this point, again, we're gonna leave that threaded on our needle here and we're just gonna kind of set it to the side. But at this point, we are going to grab our stump. So you could use cinnamon, like cinnamon sticks, or piece of tree branch like me, or even, you know, you could crochet one, or even possibly like a wine cork. I've seen those too that look really cute too. Whatever you choose to do. I tend to like to secure it a little bit. You don't want to handle it, even doing this, you don't want to handle the pumpkin by the stem, just on the off chance that it does come back up. But, you know, this can help secure it a little bit more. I also find that like little knots and stuff in the wood or where other branches were broken off, I'll put those ends down inside because it's just another level of resistance for keeping it in the pumpkin and not pulling out of the pumpkin. So I'm actually going to take my hot glue gun and just very carefully, again, this is hot, do not burn yourself. Put a nice little gob of hot glue on that stump. And then I kind of just gently worm it in there and then pull tight. And I am going to continue working around just the same way we did on the bottom. I'm going to do another round of cinching through those ridge stitches just to keep everything nice and tight. This time it can be a little tricky trying to wedge everything in there because it is kind of tight quarters in there right now. But just do the best you can and try and get it as tight as you can. And then let me finish doing this real quick and I'll show you how to tie it off, which is, you're going to love that because there's no end to weave. I don't like weaving ends if I can avoid it. Okay, so where's my seam? Here's my seam. I'm coming back around to the starting point again. So I'm bringing that through those last two ridges. I kind of like my stump a little crooked. It gives it a little character. You can do whatever you want to do to try and straighten it out if you want. I'm not really that worried about it. So what I'm going to do from here is I am just going to take my needle and just thread it down in at an angle so that I come out one of these holes down here in the body. Whoops, knocking the camera again. And that's as easy as it is. So I'll pull it a little tight. Where's my scissors? There we are. So I'll pull it a little tighter. Cut close to the pumpkin, but don't cut the pumpkin. Give it a squish. And there is your main body of your pumpkin. And you can stop here if you want, or you can add maybe a little more character to it and put a ribbon. I've got some 3/8 inch ribbon here. This is just like a burnt orange color. And when I do mine, I tend to leave it on there so that I only cut exactly what I need. I'm going to move my hot glue gun out of the way because I don't want to burn myself. That would not be fun. Also not part of that process. So I kind of leave, it just depends on how big you like your bows. I leave about 1 foot and then I will kind of just wrap it around. And tie it tight. And then I'll take I'll just do a standard shoelace bow. And there we go. And then once I know how long my tail is left, I cut that one to match it. And voila, that's it. So now I have these really cute little pumpkins. Just as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is the same number of stitches. I did 16 on this one for the tall one and 16 on the shorter one. The difference is that when I worked the tall and skinny one here, I only did 18 rows. Well, actually on this one, I think I did 17, but the rest of my tall skinny pumpkins are 18. So I did fewer rows on this one, and that made the diameter smaller. So, and then of course, when I cinched everything on this one, you saw me pull it really tight from that center yarn. This one, I didn't do that so much. I didn't worry about that so much, that it just basically ended up kind of just tall and skinny, and I roll it to try and get any of the weird wobblies out. And then that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful. If there's anything else you guys would like to see, let me know, or tutorial wise, like any stitches, anything like that, of course. Just as a heads up, this is my pretty basic beginner friendly pumpkin, just because it uses only half double crochet in the third loop, and that's it. I do have another pumpkin pattern on my blog, and I'll link that for you below. That's a little bit more detailed, a little bit more, works on a diagonal sort of. So I would say it's probably a little bit more advanced beginner as opposed to just beginner. But I will link that for you below. And on that one, it actually does have a crochet stem as well as like a little curly cue. So I will link that in the description box below. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I hope you make lots of pumpkins, and if you do, I hope that you'll tag me. Use hashtag LaBelleVie for me. I'll put it in the description box below as well. Or you can just tag me either on Facebook or on Instagram at Hooks Books Wanderlust. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.